Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I hope you are having a great day. This is an update to the story from the previous video. If you haven't watched it yet, the link to it is here above. If you have, let's start on today's video. Today's story includes relationship problems, toxic parents, codependency, denial, emotional damage, and parental manipulation. Be aware. Update: Am I the idiot for missing an actual emergency because I turned off my phone to avoid my wife's unnecessary contact attempts during my tech-free weekend? I wasn't expecting to have an update this soon, but I guess it's one of those situations where once you open a door, you can't close it. What played out in the comments of the OP is embarrassing to read back. There were things I could admit to myself and to friend, but not to anyone else. Even anonymously, I was crafting stories that might help explain away past behaviors of mine. A lot of what I wrote were go-to scripts I had gone over in my head a million times, in case anyone brought up the fact that it was weird for us to be living together in the way that we were. Still, some were able to see through it. I started therapy twice a week after my first post. My initial get-to-know-you appointment was on Friday, then I had sessions on Monday and Wednesday, which will likely be my schedule moving forward as well. I've only just begun to unpack some of the religious trauma I've experienced. I know this is going to come as a shock to some of you, since many seemed convinced friend was a villain, but my therapist has continuously praised his presence in my life. Going to a public high school, getting out of my hometown bubble, and having someone there who was able to ground me and understand me helped me not sink further into shame and guilt. I could have been so much more repressed if things had been different. He was welcomed into the latter half of my last session and it was so healing. I cherish our life together. Him granting me so much patience makes me feel loved beyond words, and I'm working to believe I deserve it. I'm also working to remind him how much I love him. He says he already knows. I was planning to keep up appearances with my wife throughout this process. I wanted to focus on me before I jumped into making big external life decisions. My therapist was encouraging me to at least begin thinking about initiating a conversation, but I was reluctant. What ended up happening wasn't the best outcome. While having lunch with my parents yesterday, my father made a comment about my wife and I having children soon. This wasn't like the marriage ultimatum they had given me before. I am no longer financially bound to them in any way, and it was likely harmless, but it flipped a switch inside of me. I panicked, firmly told them we were not having children, and made a quick getaway. I took a few hours to myself, called my therapist, and then finally spoke to my wife about ending our marriage. So that's where we're at now. I'm going to start looking for an apartment with the goal of buying a home with friend within the next few years. We plus my therapist all agreed that me living alone was best for my healing journey for now. I think I'll be going low contact with my parents. I hold some resentment towards my soon-to-be ex due to a lot of things, which I can elaborate further on, within reason, if that's something people would be interested in. Thanks again to all who was kind to me. Valentine's Day is approaching and I'm looking forward to mine. I can answer questions below if you have them. I know I have a long road ahead in terms of getting to the place I want to be, but man, it feels good to finally be able to talk a little more freely about things. Edit: If you mention anything about grooming or manipulation, I'm deleting your comment. I have made it very clear across multiple comments of my own on my original post, that I have a very hard line boundary when it comes to this. I even mentioned it in an edit to my original post. It's making me uncomfortable, and not in the I'm having an epiphany way you guys are hoping, but in the you're jumping to incredibly crude conclusions about someone I love and trust based on a tiny snippet into our life way. I don't understand how some people feel so comfortable throwing around words like that, when they carry such a heavy weight. OP also give more information in the update comments. May be tough to do so, but are you able to elaborate more on what the conversation was like with your wife? I had a therapy session yesterday morning, but after what happened at lunch, I felt it necessary to call her and regroup. Like I said, my focus had been on myself, so beginning the process of ending my relationship had basically been at the very bottom of my to-do list. Now, it was a priority. My therapist initially encouraged me to cool down and at least sleep on it before I had the conversation, but I told her I couldn't do that. I felt suffocated by the circumstances of my situation in a way I hadn't before. After we discussed, I had some helpful strategies to help me out going into things. I made sure to have specific talking points I wanted to hit, so I wasn't going in blind. While there was no specific time limit on this conversation, I wanted it to have a clear beginning and end, and not spend the entirety of it rambling aimlessly. Some of these talking points included how I was sure of my decision and nothing was going to change my mind. I tried to use as many I statements as possible in order to avoid sounding confrontational. I was warned against discussing future plans with her, even though I have them. The focus of the conversation was to stay solely on ending the relationship, not on separation of assets or what's to come during/post the divorce. I was encouraged to approach the situation with empathy. I tried to implement all of these little details as I could. I invited my wife to a coffee shop to talk, as I thought it might limit some of the emotional escalation I was warned about. I didn't feel comfortable doing it in private, and luckily she didn't cause a scene. It went about as well as you could expect. I stayed on course, but offered as much empathy as I could. I suggested therapy to deal with some of the more intense feelings. She continually asked me why, but that is not a question I'm comfortable answering truthfully right now to her, or really anyone besides my very close circle of friends. Instead, I told her I was unhappy and had been for quite some time. She left soon after to go to a friend's place, and I went home to begin packing. Edit, she also continually said this was coming out of left field, but I disagree. Despite her not knowing the ins and outs of my life for the past decade, though I sincerely doubt she knew nothing, we have been arguing for the past few months about ridiculous things as it is. One being the fact that I'm growing out my hair. It's down to a little past my chin now, but ever since I stopped getting it regularly cut, she has complained to me about it. At first, it began as something I thought she was joking about by saying I had better hair than her. I'm Korean, my hair is naturally very thick and fluffy when I let it get long enough, until it devolved into her nearly constantly bringing up my appearance and the fact that my hair got into her face at night and bothered her. Even if things had been different, that's just one thing in a long list of other problems, and I think she and I are just incompatible people. I would never make disparaging comments about her appearance to her as some kind of daily complaint. Oh, and I hope you are enjoying the video so far. If so, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications to know when a new video is out. Now let's continue reading OP's replies, and more info that he left in the comments. You may not want to answer this, and that is completely okay, but was the ultimatum the only reason you married your soon-to-be ex-wife? The ultimatum was the only reason I did a lot of things. I was stuck in the unfortunate post-college loop of applying for entry-level jobs that expected experience that I essentially had no way of getting, unless I did unpaid internships, and never hearing back from anyone. I was working while I was applying, but it was a minimum wage job that didn't relate to my degree. Friend got a pretty awesome opportunity once he finished with postgrad to go be an assistant professor in the area he lives now, and the plan was for me to move with him. The only problem is that this area is more expensive than the one we were living in for university, and I was already struggling to pay my half of the rent. He told me plenty of times that he was fine covering it until I was on my feet fully, but it was a pride thing. Suddenly I was in a position where I was financially reliant on my parents, and took about 500 steps back in terms of all the work I had done to build my independence. It sparked a series of bad decisions that went from, "We'll no longer financially support you unless you do X," this was said with more tact, but this was the underlying message, to guilty trippy, emotional statements that wouldn't have worked on me, if I had just maintained my distance from them. That's my long, roundabout way of saying yes, the ultimatum is the only reason I got married. As nice as it is to talk about friend like this with both my therapist and here now to some extent, I was and still am more than okay being seen as perpetually single. My wife and I were friends back when we were dating, but a few things happened that really left a sour taste in my mouth as things progressed, which is what made the engagement, us moving in together, and getting married, such a traumatic experience beyond my parents' involvement. You should be honest with her about why you're ending the marriage. She lost 3 years of her life and she's entitled to know why. You can maintain boundaries in that conversation, don't accept abuse about who you are, but she does need to know that, to an extent, this isn't her fault. I agree with this, and I wish it was something I was able to give her right now. At the moment, though, I don't see it as a viable option. Coming out is already a scary process for me when letting certain friends of mine know that I completely trust. Coming out to someone who has reason not to keep quiet about it feels like a recipe for disaster. The most I can do is promise to give her the truth one day, but I'm not sure when that day will be. Edit, to clarify a little further, I was only married for a year. Or, less than, since we haven't hit the 1-year mark yet. I'm, thankfully, no longer financial dependent on my parents anymore, but you're right, it was more than a single ultimatum. It was them slowly leveraging the power they had over me to up the ante from small things up until the marriage shit. You've given me a lot to think on. I hope one day I'll be able to stop holding on to this anger I have, like you're saying, but I know it's going to take a lot of time. A lot of your comment is spot on to how I feel. And finally, yes, he is an invaluable support system for me. His patience and understanding will never cease to astound me, and I'm working to mirror them. I'm so thankful he waited for me to get my shit together, and I'll spend forever trying to figure out how to make up these 3 years to him. Because, despite his reassurances, I do feel guilty that I also wasted 3 years of his time we could have been living together still, even though our lives were still very much entwined over those 3 years. But above all the anger and the guilt, there is so much happiness that I get a lifetime with him. Make sure you don't stake your happiness and life in anyone else, including friend. Obviously you need and value and treasure his support now, and it would be great for you if things work out all the way with you too, but what if it doesn't, like 5 years down the road? Make sure you work through all your resentment and issues on your own terms, so that if things don't work out with friend in the future, you're not led to further self-doubt and confusion. Have you had serious arguments or disagreements with him? Any issues where you're diametric opposites and it leads to serious conflict? Our biggest conflict was at the time when he got the job opportunity one mentioned in another comment. He assumed I would be moving with him, and I started an argument over that because I was insecure about my financial situation. However, this was resolved quickly after I took some time for myself and then openly communicated about where I was coming from and why I came at the assumption in a less than level-headed way. Other than that, no, I can honestly say we've had very few serious fights. We've bickered before, as everyone does, but those times are few and far between. From very early on, we've just been comfortable talking to and compromising with one another. If we butt heads on a topic, which, again, is rare, we just talk it out until we come to some sort of conclusion, even if that conclusion is to agree to disagree. We agree on everything that matters: religion, children both if we want them and how to raise them if we ever were to have them, politics, finances, basic goals. We also lived together for going on 6 years at one point. I know that partnerships/friendships/etc. longer than ours have broken down. Despite that, I can sincerely say I think this person will be in my life forever. But yes, I'm also focusing on healing for myself. I want to live my life for me, not for my parents or for anyone else's opinions of me. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on some of the resentments you held toward your wife from before this? So far, all the comments and examples you've given don't arise to anything significant, and I believe they feel differently to you than they seem to us. To me, I feel if you replaced friend with your wife for every event/example you've provided, I think your response would be significantly different. So I'm curious how much of that is her and what she did versus just the fact that you entered into the marriage with a heart full of resentment from your parents' ultimatum. There were quite a few small issues, like the one about my hair that I mentioned in a previous comment, that I honestly don't really feel like going into specific detail about here. Lots of petty nitpicking about my appearance and my actions. My response would not be different in most of these cases if this behavior had come from friend. He obviously has flaws just like everyone else, but they don't include telling me off for how I choose to present myself. I also didn't really want to include this because she's a product of her environment just as I am, but she's made a few homophobic-leaning remarks over the time I've known her. It's been nothing outright, but small things like the, "I wonder which one of them is the woman in the relationship," ignorant statements add up. Also, and this is where most of my resentment stems, there have been a few different instances during our relationship and marriage that led me to believe she knew more about my situation than she was letting on, and it really bothered me. One particular time, we were watching Euphoria. My wife enjoyed the show, but I found it to be a weird mix of really adult situations along with asinine teenage drama, but I would watch what interested me and tune out the rest. Spoilers ahead if you're planning on watching it, I guess. But there's one specific episode where they explore the backstory of an older male character. He fell for his male best friend in high school and then, because he got a woman pregnant, ends up having to move on to raise his child and get married. In present day, he's in his 40s or 50s and it shows him returning to the gay bar he used to frequent with his best friend. A young man, a stranger, comes up and dances with him, but we get to see inside the older man's imagination, so it looks like he's dancing with his best friend from all those years ago. He brushes his imagination-fueled best friend's hair away from his face and whispers, "I thought I lost you." I can remember this so vividly despite only seeing it once quite a while ago, because it stuck with me. I can't say I don't cry at any television shows, but this was more than just a misty-eyed reaction. It really struck a chord with me. It was easy for me to imagine myself in that position. If I had kept things going how they were, that could have been me 20 years from now. All the warm memories I have could have been taken from me and turned into something bittersweet. I could be the man, drunk and stumbling around a place friend and I had been together, searching for the ghost of something no longer there. I ended up leaving the room, telling her the episode was too sad. Eventually it ended and my wife came to check on me, or, she jokingly asked if I had something to tell her. It was one of a few different instances like this that made my stomach turn. It felt so belittling and mocking, not just of my situations, but of my empathy and emotions. That's not the kind of person I enjoy spending time around, but I would just brush it off and take it on the chin, because I didn't feel comfortable arguing because I might have been seen as too defensive. I think I see where you stand, but did she ever feel the lack of sex was a problem? You mentioned that you had long sex life. Did you have sex with other girls before your wife? I never slept with any women before I met my wife, no. She never brought it up to me if she thought it was a problem. There were times she would try to initiate following my decision to halt all sexual contact, but I would just say I wasn't in the mood and she would stop. Sex was never really a topic of discussion between us, and I'm thankful for that. It was very by the books missionary every single time, and I think that helps me distance myself from the memories a little bit. It feels like it wasn't me. We'll just add that to the list of things I probably need to work through in therapy, but despite that time in my life, I consider myself a very sex-positive person. I also happen to be a very private person. I think that stems from me having a protective streak surrounding my bond with friend. I'm proud of it, but it's also just ours. I don't really want prying eyes on something I consider so personal and deeply meaningful. You had said something about how you don't understand why people use a robust sex life as a crutch in a relationship. I've got a whole other post on my page talking how uncomfortable it makes me that people treat sex as the end-all, be-all of a healthy relationship when I would say the thing they're looking for is intimacy. But I won't go on a rant about that here. My sex life with my soon-to-be ex was, basically non-existent. The number of times we had sex is in single digits. It was a boundary for myself that I wish I never would have crossed. She and I are obviously incompatible sexually. Well, duh. She is a woman and you are a gay man, no mystery there. I think she enjoyed the first couple times it happened, but as time progressed, it was hard for me to get aroused or hype myself up enough to perform sex acts that I didn't enjoy. It stopped altogether pretty soon after that. Yikes, sorry for all the details. I didn't ever find marriage to be safe, rewarding, or warm. I can't speak for her on whether she did or not. I never felt particularly unsafe, but there was definitely always an undercurrent of discontent running through me. It was a rough few years. Wow. Look, I won't pretend that I fully understand what OP went through growing up, all the trauma, fear and pressure from parents, and rejection from himself, afraid of being who he is, and I'm completely defend that a person only should come out when they're ready and if it's their choice. But come on OP, you intentionally deceived your ex-wife for many years, and now you're trying to make her into the bad guy to somehow justify the end of your marriage. Which is simply because you're gay and in love with your best friend. You may want to admit it or not, but you love him. And again, I'm sorry that you were forced into this marriage by your parents, but they are the ones who did this, not her. You agreed to marry her, you asked her to marry you, you entered this marriage knowing that your feelings for your friend were bigger than you wanted to admit, definitely bigger than anything that you ever felt for her. So to your situation, your parents are idiots, and in relation to hers, it's you. Also, ending a marriage in a diner so she doesn't, quote, make a scene. Come on dude, she wasn't someone you were dating for a few weeks, she was your wife, have a little more respect. And as for whether she knew or not, I can't tell you. People say, the spouse always knows, but sometimes they don't, or it's too painful to admit to themselves, only she can answer that. And you were so dismissive in relation to your ex-wife in these posts, that I don't even know if I believe the version of the facts/memories you told us here. Sorry, but I still think you're the idiot. But either way, you are now being true to yourself, and I hope you have the life you want from now on, whether alone, with friend, or with someone else. Good luck. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.